The box wasn't supposed to open. It had been locked for years. But when it finally did, there was a letter inside. I have never told anyone this before. Not my friends, not my family. Some stories stay buried, not because they are small, but because speaking them out loud changes something inside you. Once you say them, they do not stay in one place. They move, they spread, they change the way you remember everything that came before. For most of my life, this story lived quietly in me. It did not interrupt my work days. It did not follow me into conversations. It did not demand attention. It simply waited, like something patient and cold, hiding behind ordinary routines. I built a normal life on top of it. A job, a schedule, a phone full of reminders, a fridge full of groceries, a name I answered to without hesitation. From the outside, my life looked stable. I was 32. I paid my bills on time. I went to work, came home, and repeated the same week until the months blurred together. If you saw me on the street, you would not remember my face. I was invisible in the way most adults become invisible. Quiet, predictable, unremarkable. That is what made the truth dangerous. It was hidden inside a life that looked complete. The past does not usually arrive loudly. It does not announce itself with drama. It arrives in small, harmless moments, disguised as something ordinary. A smell that pulls you backward, a name you have not heard in years, a photograph you forgot existed. For me, it arrived as an envelope, a thin envelope, yellowed with age, no return address, no name written on the front, just a date written in faded ink, 17 years ago. I remember holding it in my hands and feeling something shift. Not panic, not fear, recognition, a feeling that my body understood before my mind did. A feeling that said, this is not meant for you. This is the kind of truth you only find when someone wants you to get hurt. I stood there for a long time, long enough to imagine putting it back, long enough to picture myself closing the box and walking away. I could have returned to my routine. I could have slept. I could have stayed the person I was 5 minutes earlier. That version of me would have been protected by ignorance, comfortable, unchanged. But curiosity is quiet. It does not shout. It speaks softly and reasonably. It tells you that one look will not hurt. It tells you that not knowing is worse. It tells you that you deserve answers. I told myself I would just read the first line, just the first line, and then I would stop. I broke the seal. The paper inside was thin, slightly rough. The handwriting was careful, almost trembling, like the person who wrote it had to force themselves to finish. I unfolded it slowly, as if speed would make the truth sharper. The letter began with a sentence that tightened my chest. If you are reading this, it means I was too afraid to tell you the truth myself. I read it again, then again slower. The room felt smaller. The silence felt heavier. The air felt different, like it belonged to someone else. In that moment, I understood something that scared me more than the words on the page. This letter was not about a small secret. It was about a decision that had been made around me before I was old enough to notice. I did not know yet what the decision was, but I knew it had shaped my life. My name is Daniel, and this is the confession that changed everything I believed about who I am. Before I tell you what that letter revealed, you need to understand the life it interrupted. On the surface, my life was normal. I was 32 years old. I had a stable job. I paid my bills on time. I kept my calendar full enough to look responsible, and empty enough to feel safe. I answered emails, sat in meetings, nodded at conversations I did not care about, and told myself that stability was the same thing as peace. I met friends for coffee once or twice a month. We talked about work, about traffic, about small frustrations that sounded important only because they were easy to discuss. We laughed at things that were not really funny. We avoided silence by filling it with harmless stories. Nothing personal, nothing heavy. From the outside, I was fine. That is the strange thing about secrets. They do not always destroy a life immediately. Sometimes they hide inside it, supported by routine. Sometimes they become part of the foundation, so normal that you stop noticing the weight you're carrying. I grew up in a small house in a quiet neighborhood where nothing ever really happened. No scandals, no headlines, no stories people whispered about. Just my father, my mother, and me. My father believed in order, in discipline, in structure. The television stayed off during dinner. Conversation stayed simple. You did not ask complicated questions when food was on the table. You did not bring emotions into the room. Silence was expected, and because it was expected, it became a rule. My mother made the rule feel softer. She kept things calm. She smiled when the air got tense. She redirected conversations with a gentle voice. If my father's presence made the room feel smaller, my mother tried to open a window with kindness. As a child, I thought this was what families were supposed to feel like. I thought silence was personality. I did not know that silence could be intentional. I did not know it could be trained. Looking back, I realize our home was built carefully, not for warmth, but for stability. There were no arguments, not because we were harmonious, but because certain topics were removed before they could appear. There were no loud emotions, not because we did not feel them, but because we did not allow them to take up space. And without being told directly, I learned what not to ask. If I asked about my father's childhood, he would answer briefly and then change the subject. If I asked about my mother's life before she married him, she would smile too quickly and say something vague, something that sounded like an answer, but was really a wall. Some things are better left in the past, she would say. When you grow up like that, you stop noticing what is missing. You stop noticing the empty spaces in the story of your own life. You assume those spaces exist because they do not matter. That is how a lie survives. But by being treated like the most ordinary thing in the world, I learned to behave inside that structure. I learned to keep my voice steady. I learned to present good grades like proof that I deserved stability. I learned to avoid questions that made the air heavier. And because the rules were invisible, they felt natural, like gravity, like weather. You do not argue with weather, you adapt to it. You learn how to live inside it. For years, that was my life. Ordinary on the outside, quiet on the inside. A structure built to hold something in place. Until the night I held that envelope and realized the structure was not as strong as I believed. As I got older, the silence in our house became harder to ignore. It was not peaceful silence. It was careful silence. The kind that makes you lower your voice without being asked. The kind that teaches you to watch faces, to measure moods, to avoid the edges of certain topics. At the dinner table, forks touched plates gently. Glasses were placed down without noise. If I moved my chair too quickly, my father's eyes would lift for half a second, and my body would slow down automatically. No one ever slammed a door. No one ever raised their voice. As a child, I adapted. Children always do. You learn the rules of a place before you understand why they exist. And if the rules keep the adults calm, you follow them. I learned which questions made my father stop talking. I learned which topics made my mother smile too quickly. If I asked about family history, the conversation shifted. If I asked about the past, I was told it was better left alone. If I asked why we never visited relatives, I was told we were busy. If I asked about grandparents, I was told they were not part of our lives. The answers were never angry. They were never loud. They were smooth, practiced, and complete enough to end the conversation. There were no photographs on the walls from before I was born. No old wedding pictures that showed a life I could not remember. No stories about how my parents met, told casually the way other families told them. Everything began with my childhood, as if nothing existed before it. And that should have felt strange, but when you grow up inside a story, you do not see the missing pages. You assume the book begins where you begin. Late at night, I would lie in bed listening to the house, the ticking clock, the hum of electricity, the distant sound of my parents moving quietly in the other room. Sometimes a cupboard would close, sometimes water would run, always softly, always carefully. That was when the feeling was strongest. The feeling that something important was being held in place by silence. Silence, when used long enough, becomes heavy. It presses down on the people inside it. It shapes them. It trains them to avoid anything that might cause change. Sometimes this silence felt like a fourth person in the room. Not my father, not my mother, not me, something else. It sat between us at the table. It stood behind my father when he spoke. It hovered near my mother when she smiled too quickly. And even when nothing was happening, it was present. It shaped the way we moved through the house. It made us careful with doors, careful with footsteps, careful with tone. I remember one afternoon when I asked my mother, casually, why we never visited anyone. I did not even mean it as a serious question. I was just a kid, curious. She paused, not for long, just long enough for me to notice. Then she smiled and said we were busy, that it was complicated, that our family lived far away. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were alert, almost pleading. I learned something in that moment, not the answer, the lesson. The lesson was that certain questions created a tension that did not belong in the room, and if I loved my mother, I would not create that tension again. So I stopped asking. People think secrets are hidden in dramatic places, in locked safes, in coded messages, in midnight phone calls. But in my home, the secret was hidden in something simpler, in habits, in silence, in the careful way my parents avoided the same corner of the past again and again until it became normal not to look there. I did not know it then, but the house was not quiet by accident. My father was not the kind of man people warned you about. He did not shout, he did not hit, he did not drink himself into anger. He went to work, came home on time, paid the bills, and kept the house running like a system. That made him harder to understand. He believed in discipline, in control, in doing things the correct way. Affection was unnecessary, praise was rare. When I succeeded, he nodded. When I failed, he looked disappointed. Not angry, not cruel. Disappointment was worse. Our conversations were practical. School, work, responsibilities, nothing emotional, nothing personal. Sometimes I caught him watching me. Not with warmth, not with pride, with something complicated, as if he was measuring whether something was holding together. When he noticed me noticing, the expression disappeared. He would turn away, ask a simple question, and force the moment back into normal. Looking back, I think he was performing a role, not pretending, but committing, as if he had agreed to be a father, and he intended to do it correctly, even if closeness felt dangerous. Because closeness invites questions, questions invite stories, stories invite history, and history is where secrets die. So he stayed practical, he stayed predictable, he stayed behind the role. My mother lived in a different kind of silence. Where my father was controlled, she was careful. She watched me like she was afraid of losing me, not in a dramatic way, but in small habits that never stopped. If I came home late, she studied my face, as if she was checking for damage. If I laughed too loudly, she glanced toward my father, as if laughter could trigger something. If I asked too many questions, her smile would appear quickly, like a curtain pulled across a window. Some nights, I woke up and heard her crying in the kitchen. Quiet crying, controlled crying, the sound of someone trying not to be heard. The first time it happened, I stood in the hallway and listened. The kitchen light was dim and warm. My mother sat at the table with her hands against her face, shoulders trembling slightly. I did not step inside. I did not know what to say. I did not know if speaking would make it worse. The next morning she smiled and said she had a bad dream. She said it easily, but the dreams did not stop. The tears did not stop. They just stayed hidden. As I grew older, I realized my mother was carrying something heavy, something she could not share, something she had decided to keep alone, even if it broke her slowly. The first time I heard the secret crack was when I was 15. It was late. The house was quiet. I got out of bed to get water. As I walked past my parents' bedroom, I heard voices, not shouting, whispering urgently, My father's voice came first, low and sharp. We agreed never to tell him. My mother answered, trembling, "He deserves to know." There was a pause, a heavy one. Then my father spoke again, "Not ever." I stood frozen in the hallway. My heart was pounding so loudly, I thought they would hear it. I stepped back by instinct, and the floor creaked. The voices stopped immediately. When I came into view, my father looked at me like I had done something wrong. My mother looked terrified, as if I had seen more than I should have. I mumbled something about water and went back to my room. I lay awake for hours. For the first time, I understood something clearly. There was a truth in our house that I was not allowed to know, and it had my name on it. Years later, my father died. Death does something strange to a family. It makes certain conversations impossible, and it makes others unavoidable. My mother decided to sell the house. She said she couldn't stay there anymore. Too many memories, too much silence. I volunteered to help her pack. It felt like the right thing to do, the way you do tasks when you do not know how to comfort someone. You carry boxes because you cannot carry grief. The attic was full of old things that had been forgotten on purpose. Dusty boxes, photo albums, blankets that smelled like time. We worked quietly. My mother moved slowly, tired. Sometimes she picked up an object and stared at it as if it belonged to a different life. Sometimes she put it down without a word. Near the back, behind a stack of albums, I found a small wooden box. It was tucked away like someone did not want it discovered by accident. The box was locked. That detail made my chest tighten. People do not lock boxes for nothing. They lock boxes because they are afraid or because they made a promise. I called my mother over and asked if she knew what it was. She walked toward me, and when she saw the box, her face changed. Just for a second, then she tried to cover it with a calm expression. She said she did not know. She said it must be old. She reached for it too quickly. Her hands were shaking. I pulled the box slightly away without thinking. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just enough to make it clear I had noticed. My mother swallowed. Her eyes were wet before she even spoke. "Daniel," she said softly, "please." That word, please, did not sound like a request. It sounded like a warning. In that moment, the attic felt colder. The dust in the air felt heavier. I suddenly remembered the argument from when I was 15. We agreed never to tell him. My mother looked at me as if she could see two versions of me at once. The adult standing in the attic, and the child she had been protecting for years. She told me to leave it alone. She told me it did not matter. She told me there was nothing inside worth digging up. But her fear said the opposite. Then her phone rang downstairs. She hesitated, torn between staying and answering. Finally, she went down, calling back that she would be right there. And suddenly I was alone with the box again. The silence returned, thick and familiar, like the house was holding its breath. I looked at the lock. I looked at the way the box had been hidden, and I realized something that made my stomach turn. If the truth had been hidden from me my entire life, it was not going to reveal itself politely. It was not going to appear because I asked nicely. It had been buried on purpose. It had been sealed on purpose. I searched nearby, not like a thief, but like someone desperate for clarity. Behind an old photo frame, taped carefully to the back, was a small key. A key hidden in plain sight. My hands went cold. I held the key over the lock and hesitated. I could still stop. I could still put everything back and pretend I never saw it. But I remembered my mother's face. I remembered her voice when she said, "Please." I turned the key. The lock clicked open. The sound was quiet, but it felt like thunder. Inside were a few folded papers, neatly arranged, and on top an envelope. No name, no address, just a date. 17 years ago. My throat tightened. I stared at it for a long time, and then I opened it. The paper inside the envelope was thin. The handwriting was careful, almost trembling. It looked like the words had been written by someone who could barely hold the pen steady. Someone who was fighting themselves line by line. The letter began, "If you are reading this, it means I was too afraid to tell you the truth myself." I read it again, slower. My heart was beating hard enough to shake my hands. The letter said the writer had tried to do the right thing. It said they had made a promise. It said they had chosen silence because they believed silence would protect someone. Then I reached a sentence that made the room tilt. The man you call your father is not your biological father. I stopped breathing. It was not simply shock. It was the feeling of standing on a floor you trusted, and realizing it has been hollow the entire time. I sat down on the attic boards. The wood felt hard under my legs, but I barely noticed. My mind tried to reject the words. It tried to rewrite them into something softer. It tried to pretend I had misread. But the sentence was clear, simple, sharp. The man you call your father, not your biological father. Everything rearranged itself in my head. My father's distance, my mother's careful smile, the arguments that stopped when I entered the room. The letter continued. It mentioned someone from the past, a man my mother loved before she met the father who raised me. A man whose name had been erased from our home so completely that I'd never even heard it spoken. It mentioned an accident, but not the details. It mentioned fear. It mentioned a decision made under pressure. The kind of decision we make when you believe you have no good options. The letter was not cruel. It did not try to hurt me. That almost made it worse, because it meant the lie had been told with intention. Not to punish me, but to shape my life without my consent. I felt anger, but it had nowhere to land. My father was gone. The writer of the letter had no name. My mother was downstairs pretending the past was still buried. I kept reading until my eyes reached the final lines. There is someone you need to find, someone who knows the rest of the story. My hands shook, not just from shock, but from the realization that the letter was not finished with me. It was giving me a task. It was turning my life into a search. And in that moment, I understood the most terrifying part of all. If the letter was telling me to find him, it meant the past was not over. It was still alive somewhere, waiting. When my mother came back upstairs, she knew immediately. She looked at my face and froze, as if she could read what I had done without a single word. "Daniel," she said, "what did you do?" I tried to speak, but my voice felt trapped. My mother stepped closer, and her voice dropped to a whisper. I pulled the letter out and placed it between us. My mother did not touch it. She stared at the date, and her eyes filled with tears. For a moment, neither of us moved. I asked the question that had been building in me since the moment I read that sentence. "Mom, who is he?" My mother closed her eyes. We went downstairs and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we had eaten in silence for years, the same kitchen where I had heard her cry at night. My mother wrapped her hands around a mug she never drank from. "Some truths destroy more than they heal," she said. I unfolded the letter again and read the last line out loud. "Find him before it is too late." My mother flinched, like the words carried a sound only she could hear. "If you go looking," she whispered, "you will wake things you cannot put back to sleep." But the truth was already awake in me. That night I barely slept. Every memory felt different, as if it had been holding something back. My father's distance, my mother's fear, the careful quiet of our home. I kept seeing the date on the envelope, 17 years ago, and I kept hearing the sentence, "Find him before it is too late." In the next episode, I will tell you who he is. I will tell you what the letter did not say, and why my mother spent 17 years trying to erase him from our lives. Because the truth is not only about my father, it is about what happened the night I was born, and the choice someone made that changed every life connected to mine. And the locked box was only the beginning.